the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, a new Ishmael Jones novel, a Baen Books debut, and stories of ancient aliens. Plus, we continue our ongoing audiobook serialization of Timothy Zahn's Cobra, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. This week, Griffin Barber sat down with John Van Stry about his Baen Books debut novel, Summer's Inn, which, depending on when you are hearing this, is either out now or will be shortly in trade paperback. We're excited to have Van Stry write for us, and we're sure readers will be pleased as well. But first, the news. December is here, bringing with it the Baen December hardcover and trade paperbacks. Let's take a look. First up is Haunted by the Past by Simon R. Green. When Lucas Carr goes missing, seemingly without a trace, from Glenberry Hall, an old country manor house turned hotel, it falls to Ishmael Jones and his love and partner in crime, Penny Belcourt, to solve the mystery. The pair soon find that Glenberry Hall has a reputation for being haunted, but Carr's disappearance may have as much to do with the mysterious organization Jones and Belcourt and Carr work for as it does with the Hall's past. Ishmael and Penny have to work their way through a series of mysterious clues and misleading suspects, uncovering secret after secret before they finally arrive at a truth that no one suspected. The problem with history is that it's not always content to stay in the past. Next up, we have Summer's Inn by John Van Stry, which you'll hear about more in just a moment. Fresh out of college with his ship engineer third-class certificate, Dave Walker is forced to take the first berth he can find, the Iowa Hill, an old tramp freighter running with a minimal crew and nearing the end of its useful life, plying the routes that the corporations ignore and visiting the kinds of places that the folks on Earth pretend don't exist. Between the assassins, the criminals, and the pirates he needs to deal with, Dave is discovering that there are a lot of things out there that he still needs to learn. But there's one hard lesson he learned long ago that he's being forced to remember: how to be ruthless. And finally, we have the anthology Worlds Long Lost, edited by Christopher Rocchio and Sean C.W. Korsgaard, which we will be featuring on the podcast soon. We were not alone. The farther we push into the universe, the more obvious it becomes. The signs are everywhere: canals and pyramids on Mars, old roads on the moons of Jupiter, ruined cities on worlds about the nearer stars. The galaxy once teemed with life, or so it seems, which begs the question, what happened to it all? With these all-new stories, explore the ruins of lost civilizations, solve ancient mysteries, and awaken horrors from beyond the dawn of time. That's Haunted by the Past by Simon R. Green, out now in hardcover, and Summer's Inn by John Van Stry, and Worlds Long Lost, edited by Christopher Rocchio and Sean C.W. Korsgaard, both out now in trade paperback.
Hi there, I'm Griffin Barber, your host for today's edition of the Baen Free Radio Hour. Few authors have more fascinating biographies than our guest today, John Van Stry. He's an Air Force veteran, an engineer with some of the aerospace industry's most prestigious names, been a private contractor on special projects, government included, and a lifelong writer. He found the time to establish a thriving indie career with stories across the genre. Summer's End, the novel we're here to talk about today, is the first in a new series. Hello and welcome, John.
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. So I like to ask the hardest question first. What for you was the coolest aspect of Summer's End?
That's a tough one. You know, it's like asking a mother which of her children she likes the most. But the world, I really like the world. or the universe it's in. I wanted it to be near space. I didn't want it to be, a star system, regular science fiction. Definitely want it to be hard science fiction. And I wanted to get into some more of the nitty gritty aspects of, for the people who work in this. So some of it's still, kind of normal for everybody, like just living on planet Earth. There's a lot of day-to-day stuff that we all take for granted. But then you have the people who make everything work or make everything run, they keep things interconnected. And those people have a different life because they see a lot of different things. They go to a lot of different places. The idea for the world that, okay, we're a couple hundred years in the future, gravity is fully understood. It's been conquered. So we have gravity drives. We can get constant acceleration drives, which means the solar system has become a much smaller place. And if you build one big enough, you can move anything.
Right.
So there was a big diaspora. People went and they grabbed all the asteroids and planets and moons or just built stuff from scratch. And in a lot of cases, they moved said asteroids. Nobody's allowed to move moons anymore. There's a little problem with that. But other than that, so you have anything you can think of, and it's all over the place because, the solar system is pretty huge. People don't understand the vastness of scale involved, which means that you're living out someplace where no one knows who you are. Your little society can be whatever weird idea or great idea you happen to come up with. So it gives a lot of opportunity to play on things.
So the vastness of space, yet also kind of the small neighborhood that you might be in is being one of the cool aspects of it for you. And how we got there, I guess. So you didn't sound like you quite stumbled on that aspect, or more that you kind of as a natural outgrowth of your background, which is, if I can say so, is really impressive with the aerospace industry stuff and that kind of thing. So, or did the characters or the world building kind of dictate what the story was going to be for you?
Well, the world building is where I started, and I could probably dig this conversation out because this happened. It was going on between me and a couple of people on my Patreon. I said, I'm looking to do this, and here's some of the things, and we're kicking ideas back and forth. And someone threw up the idea of, I think it was a Dyson sphere kind of thing where everybody would be living on the surface and how big that would be. And it's like, yeah, but that's a bit out there. And I started thinking, well, wait a second. What about if everybody can just terraform asteroids to whatever they want? And if you've got constant gravity, well, you can put gravity plates in. And there were some ideas from short stories and stuff that help percolate some of that out as to how some of this could work and how you could do it. And a lot of it is just from what I've seen, the world, interpersonal interactions, my being out in the world, things I've seen, that helps start delivering a lot of the socioeconomic, whatever the word is, of everything, how things interrelated, how things intertied. I've read a lot of history, so I understand how a lot of that goes on because history is always great. It tends to repeat itself, or at least it carries a tune.
Right.
And you can go back through all those things and figure out and look at past stuff. So it kind of, once I had the world, and then I started populating it in my head. And then once I had to populate in my head, okay, what's the story I'm going to tell? And Dave Walker was, and I wish I could remember where I came with the name Walker from, but he kind of came along when I started saying, okay, this is what I think the Earth will be like in 200 or 300 years, where I see society, present trends. Yeah, I think society is going more or less to what's in the book, unless something major comes along, because I've looked at history and this stuff before.
Right.
And then it just kind of built from there once I had my character and where he was and what he was doing.
So along those lines, which character in Summer's End surprised you?
It's kind of a toss-up between Dot and Casey, the girl he marries. I think that's her name. I got
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, I have a cheat sheet up on the side here, but I have to scroll through it to see it. Because Dot started out, Dot is very much based on a real life person in many ways. And it was funny because I gave her a copy of the book on Saturday when I was out visiting my friends in Wichita Falls, because she's a pilot and she has a lot of technical experience and she's got a technical degree and she's done a lot of high-end technical work. And did you lose me? My camera blinked out for a minute.
Nope.
Okay. Just as long. Internet here is sometimes problematic. We're on a tower. And so the character talks in that way, where sometimes they'll come up to you when you're wrong about something or you're being really stupid, and they'll smile and say things in the most cheerful way. When suddenly you realize that I'm in trouble.
the bless your heart.
Worse than that. and then it's like as that character grew, I realized Dot needs a dark past. Dot needs to have a lot more going on than anybody realizes.
Right.
And I have a short story, and then they never got back to me to press on it, or I would have finished it, about how Dot ended up on the ship. I don't want to spoil exactly what Dot is, or what their past history is. The short story tells a lot. But, that's one of the characters. Casey kind of surprised me because she was a bit of a throwaway character at first. And once I figure out a character and I put him in my head, I start letting them run because I have a little idea of who they are, what they're looking for. And, it's just what happened there wasn't exactly expected, with her and Dave. It drove the book along well, but, that book wasn't heavily plotted. It was loosely plotted. I knew certain things where they were going and stuff, but every once in a while you get hit with an unexpected thing that happens.
Right.
It's like the piracy thing that happens was going to happen, but it didn't happen where I expected it to. It kind of took a life of its own. And after that, it took a huge left turn there for a little bit until I figured out exactly what was going on.
Neat. So it's interesting to me because I did appreciate Dot. She reminded me of a sergeant that I had that, that she was the epitome of walk softly and carry a big stick. You never knew how much she knew about what was going on. And when you had messed up, she would let you know in no uncertain terms that you'd messed up. And if you showed a willingness to course correct and fix it, then she would allow you the opportunity to fix it. But don't make that mistake again. And that was what I drew from Dot as well. I did enjoy that those interactions between them, and that air of mystery never hurts any character. Maybe you can suggest that to Tony that you put the short story up on Baen.com, and maybe we get it up there.
I need to finish it, and then I'll send it in to her. At this point, because when they said they wanted a short story, but like I said, they didn't get back to me. So I had other things to do that dragged me away from getting back to it. It's half written.
Right.
But I also have another short story I want to write about. Hopefully I can say this without giving away too much of the story. But when Crow basically says, "I owe you," I want to write that.
Yep. Yeah, that was one of those kind of, all right, what's going on here? Cool.
Yeah, and the whole thing about that is the fact that the character has no idea what the hell Crow's talking about.
Right. And you've established what I liked about this too is that while Dave isn't your typical unreliable narrator, he does have some things that he lies to everybody about.
Oh yeah.
Except for one or two people, including, and he lies to the reader, the person that he's narrating to. Just because he's got to make sure that he covers all his bases when it comes to push comes to shove.
He's not lying so much; he's just leaving things out.
Yeah. Right. So you talked a little bit about how Dot came to be. What about Casey? How did she? Because you said she kind of surprised you because you were thinking she was going to be more of a.
Well, at first she didn't even exist. It wasn't until they hit the. Man, I'm getting really bad on names here. Until they
Sirius?
Sirius? Yeah, it wasn't until they hit Sirius, and because Chaz, ordinary spacer Chaz, who actually is semi based on a real person, of the same name. When I put him in the story originally, because I had, Hank and Chaz, and originally I wasn't sure what sex Chaz was going to be, if it was going to be a guy or a gal.
Right.
And there were a number of people who said, "Oh, you got to make it a gal. You got to make it a gal." And I was like, "No, I think I'm going to make it a little different, because I think it adds a little something to the story."
Yeah.
And okay, so now I got Chaz, and he's kind of sort of the new guy in some ways. He is very on certain things, because where he grew up, he's a little naive about.
Right.
And I think that comes up, but he knows the business. He knows the business really well, because he's grown up in this business, where Dave hasn't grown up in this business. He's learning it, but he's not naive on the other things at all.
Right.
And so when Chaz is like, "Okay, I want you to meet the family," and we've heard a few things about his family by then. Okay, now I got to flesh out the family.
Right.
And okay, now he's going to meet the family. And, Casey just decides to latch on to him. She sees something and she's like, grabs onto him. And then they quickly, basically, it's a whirlwind romance.
Romance. Yep.
Romance. I'll get the word out. And, I've seen that. So there are people say those things don't happen. Well, we just did our 27th. They happen.
Right.
And so I decided to, it just, sometimes the stories go a little differently than you expect. So I always leave a little wiggle room, and I'm always willing to rewrite a plot if I have to.
Very cool. Yeah, it seems to me that the familiar relationships are extremely important to all of the characters in here, which seems to me to be natural and right, but also gives you a lot of story hooks that you might not otherwise have, because it's all about who you know and that kind of thing, especially when you're out there beyond the reach of anybody else to get help. So,
yeah, I mean, I grew up in the 60s. In the 70s, I lived on an island, not a small island, but still spent a lot of time in the ocean, a lot of time in recreational stuff, mostly, go out on the ocean. So I grew up on boats. I learned to walk on a boat because my dad had a cabin cruiser for a long time. And that whole community, people don't understand that the boating community, especially the old boating community, the fishing community,
right,
all the old salts, there is it's a certain kind of vibe, a certain kind of life. And when I was living in California, I used to work with a friend of mine on his mine, and gold mine, and I eventually bought in a partnership for a while. And again, the gold mine community is a very different community with the way it works and the way people interact and stuff. And you see these kind of things, and this, some of it's a trust kind of community, and some of it's just, you have to know the dance kind of thing. And once people know that you're one of them, you're one of them. And I've known people who were merchant marine, and I know people who a long time ago had traveled on tramp steamers and stuff like that, and the things that go on. So it's definitely a very different lifestyle in certain ways, because you are away. You have to depend on each other. There's no one that's going to come and bail you out. Even today, if you're out in the middle of the ocean, there's a storm going on, you are on your own.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's anybody who's on the sharp end, and you end up having to, he may be an asshole, but he's my asshole, and he's the one that I know will reach down and pull me up to safety in the dire straits. So the family kind of mentality, or the us versus everything.
Yeah, once you become one of us and not one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a similar vein, which character from Summer's Inn would you want to avoid like the plague, and why?
I haven't really fleshed the guy out too much, but it'd probably be the guy who's the head of the Venusian Moral Collective, because there are some characters who I don't like per se, but we haven't seen a lot of screen time on them, so they haven't fleshed out too much. There were a couple who got their comeuppance as we see the things that happened to them.
Right.
But I haven't established any one solid, one single solitary bad guy beyond that dictator.
Right.
And you just know he's bad news, and you just know that he probably doesn't even realize it or care. He thinks he's probably as pure as the driven snow.
Right. Which is part of the problem, part of what makes him odious.
Yeah.
Is it just that lack of awareness, self-awareness. So which character would you want as an ally?
There's a couple of them. Hank is a strong ally. The Marzies are that way. Just the Marzie people, and especially the Marzie Navy, the Mars Navy's people. They're like, hang together, do or die. They're like your Marines almost. These are the guys who, once they've been that, they're that for the rest of their life, and they will always help out a brother, kind of a deal.
Right.
So he's definitely one. Dot's another one you want in your corner. She may not overextend herself for you, but if she's going to do it, she's going to do it.
Right.
Once she's made the commitment is made. So, those are probably the first two. There are some others. Marcus is a real solid guy once he knows that he can count on you, but he's got other things that he has to take care of first.
Right.
Other priorities. So if you're in the way of those priorities, oh, well, sorry,
Right.
Priorities got to come first.
Okay. So Summer's End has not only believable technology, but you even put in the certifications required to crew and the cost savings measures companies and crews get up to so that they make sense for a lay person who doesn't have necessarily an engineering background or anything like that. Did you do some research with wet navies for this? You mentioned the merchant marine and that kind of thing.
There was some research that was done on some aspects. A lot of the boarding actions, especially Jim Curtis, helped me with those as former Navy. I've known quite a few squids over the years, but he really understands the logistics and the legalities behind boarding operations, which was really cool because he filled me on a whole bunch of stuff that I was totally unaware of. The merchant marine stuff, my brother's actually a licensed captain. Now, he doesn't drive any big boats. He drove the New York City Fire Department boat in the harbor. So
okay.
He was one of the guys driving that. But he also used to crew in the summers on a 3-masted schooner. He was the first mate down in the Bahamas. He used to do that for a while on his vacation days because my brother loves sailboats.
Yeah.
So I've picked up some of that stuff from some of these people, and I've been on a couple of working boats over the years. And then you understand just like accounting and everything else. And there was some research. The ships themselves are all based on actual container cargo ships that are in service today. I use the weights, the size, the dead weight tonnage, how many containers they carry. There's the Panamax, which is what the Iowa Hill is. There's the new Panamax, which is for the new gates, because everything was built to go through the gates. Then you got the Panama Canal and the gates on the locks.
Yep.
Then you've got some of the bigger ones like the Maersk or whatever, and I can't remember the different classes, but ones that are so big that they can't go through the Panama Canal,
right?
Which limits to where they can go and how many. And then I sat down and did the math. I know how much it weighs. I know how much I want to accelerate it. How much energy is that going to cost? Okay, how efficient are these engines? What's the efficiency rating? So how much am I going to lose?
Right.
Okay, now I know how much power. What am I going to use for power? I decided to go with the pressurized vessel submarine reactors. I forget what they're called at the moment. There's a specific name for them. I think I mentioned it in the book somewhere.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And so we start off with those. Well, technologies come up. How have they made these things better? How have we improved these? What's the life cycle on these? How long do they have to be reloaded? How many times can be reloaded because they're too radioactive and they got to scrap them? So I figured all that out. And then it's like, okay, what's the overhead that we need to be safe? And then what do we have for backup power? It never gets mentioned, but there's even solar arrays that can be deployed in a worst case scenario. So at least you have enough power to run your nav lights and maybe a radio.
Right.
Yeah. So,
well, that was one of the things that shined through in this that I was reading it. It all seemed you'd done your homework, but you managed to include it in part of the story rather than just, slapping me over the head with how much you know. Which was a real pleasure for me because, again, as a layman who's not, aware of all the technicalities, it was neat to have this window into this world that was believable. We talked before we started here about one of my favorite scenes in film is the whole bit in Alien where they're talking about shop steward rules and all that kind of thing, with what they were required to do, what they weren't, and shares and that kind of stuff, and all of that resonated for me within Summer's End. I just really dug how the crew of the Iowa Hill interacted and why they were interacting, and the time it takes to learn to up your skillage, to become practiced at certain aspects and everything. All of that was really believable to me and really interesting for me. And again, I praise you on the research level and also on the way you doled it out rather than smothering the baby or the story with all of this knowledge that you could have possibly buried in.
Too many people will do that. I've seen they put out too much stuff. I have one rule I have is I never develop any technology if I'm developing a new technology until I absolutely need it in the book. And I never explain anything until I absolutely have to in the book, because otherwise you can get yourself in a corner.
Right.
And you have to believe that everything you're talking about is ubiquitous. It's in the world around everyone. So people don't talk about it all the time. Hey, you know how they make the red dye for this shirt?
Right.
I'm not going to tell anyone around about that. Yeah. These things have to come up, and you have to kind of sometimes set the conversation. And I've seen it in a lot of professions where there are skill and time requirements, and you have to do so much time and so much, like a pilot's license.
Yeah.
To get different certifications, you got to have so much time and so many particular things, and you have to do all these different things so you can get to the next cert. And then you take the test, whatever that test may be. And you see it in a lot of different trade industries like that.
Right.
With tradesmen and stuff. Plumbers have that, electricians.
Police officers
Yeah.
have the police officer standards and training here in California, and also I think they have it in Texas as well. Every state has its own, and they're trying to get on a national standard kind of thing. But yeah, it's again, it resonated for me just for that reason. To be a bonded person and have the knowledge base isn't enough. You have to actually get the certifications, and how you go about that. And also how that becomes part of the story it was neat. It was very impressive to me. It harkened back to kind of the older space stories that I've read, or that their settings are more in a near space capacity kind of thing, rather than having control of gravitics and that kind of thing. So again, very cool.
Yeah, I grew up on Heinlein, and with all that stuff, I mentioned that earlier, and a lot of near space stuff. And I still have a soft spot for near space. Alan Steele's one of my favorite near space authors who's currently writing. And the technology aspect again, too, because I'm an engineer and I've done aerospace stuff. A lot of that has helped, too, because you see the interactions, because, I was a flight test engineer for quite a few years. So, I'm out there at the airfield with the crews, the flight crews, the test people, the maintenance people, and we're out all around the craft and doing all the stuff. And, if there's a problem, okay, I got to go out there and I got to pull all this gear off, or I got to get a guy to help me to pull the gear off, because maybe I'm not allowed to pull that gear off. And,
right. So there are vast shading into dystopian inequities in wealth and power in Summer's End. Is the book a bit of a prophetic vision for you, or how things should continue, or the way they have been, or was it just a cool setting or something?
I think it's good. I think what I did with the Earth and with society on the Earth, I think that's pretty prophetic. I do think that we're heading down that path right now, based on history and everything else. I think that's where forces are pushing us. Whether or not that's the way it will really go, I don't know, but that's the path I see us on at the moment. There are things that could change that, but it's really, really hard to say. You can really only guess so much when it comes to the future. I know it's not the future I would like to see,
right?
Though I do believe if someone ever discovers, understands gravity enough to make a constant gravity drive, I really think if it was easy enough to make, it didn't require some ridiculous amount of stuff to do, that we'd probably see the same thing happened to the solar system in the book. Everybody would go out there and they'd start forming their own little enclaves and societies and countries. And, hey, we'll push our asteroid off where no one will find us, and we can just be self-sufficient, do our own thing. We'll do a little trade when we need to get what we don't have.
Right. Neat. So Summer's End has many characters with tough backgrounds. Did you plan this as you set out to write the story, or did it result from the characters kind of speaking to you?
Some of it resulted from the characters speaking to, but also because it's the Merchant Marine. And these aren't the big Merchant Marines. These are the guys who go to all the small ports. All because, you can't compete when you're a small shipping company by going to the major ports, because all the big ships tie up everything. It's almost like truck driving, the trucker thing. The big truck companies, they tie up all the major stuff. So the independents, the Wildcats, I've known some of those. These guys have to pick up loads where they can. They're on the road more and trying to figure out how to make that all pay so they don't deadhead a lot with empty stuff.
Right.
And so pretty much I'm looking at that as well as the old tramp steamer thing where, okay, we got to go places where the big guys don't go because there's not enough money in it. There's not enough cargo in it. Things are too rough. Maybe the facilities aren't there. It may not be safe.
Right.
Because, you're going to all these little small ports, like you're sailing around the South Pacific and all the little islands and everything. Yep. So that kind of enhanced the crew and some of the people to be a little more tough, especially the ones who are outward facing. Because, right. The cook isn't tough. The second mate, she's not tough. The first mate we kind of thought was tough. That's still out to question. Some of the people are tough, some of them aren't. But that's why a guy like Hank is on board. He's got the experience. He was a bosun's mate. Right. And I don't know if you've ever met a bosun's mate, but you do not want to fuck with a bosun's mate.
Yeah, well, and it reminded me some of the behaviors or the way of dealing with stuff was the Lescar kind of sailors from from distant lands who may not have had a whole lot of talent to do a whole lot of anything, but they learned the ropes and knew how to do things. And when push came to shove, they were very capable of mayhem.
Oh, I used to know. I didn't know him very long. It was a friend of a friend. I hung out with this guy for about 6 months to a year. I knew him. And he had been the bosun's mate on the Missouri.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, the stories he told about setting people straight and, cleaning people's acts up and stuff like that on a ship that big and a ship that's like the pride of the Navy. And there's our standards to be upheld. Oh, it was hysterical. It was the things he did. Oh, funny stories. Oh. The biggest line he used to say, and I didn't use this in the story, and I don't know if all bosun's mates use this line, but he goes, "Who has the sharpest knife on the deck? The bosun's mate." or I do.
So the event's taking place on Venus. I'm hoping that we'll get more of a firsthand account of those in a future work.
There's definitely going to be more of a run-in the next book with the people from, the VMC. They will be coming out more. We'll be seeing more of them because that kind of political society thing, those people always have to spread because, well, there's somebody who's wrong. We can't have that.
Right.
We can't have somebody who's wrong. And we've already, by the end of the book, we've seen the lengths they're willing to go to on a number of things. And we also see the lengths that certain people are willing to go to say, we need to take out some insurance just in case.
Right.
We haven't seen the last of them.
Good deal. I'm excited if that's the case because they seem to be a good foil for pointing out more of how the universe works. So just a kind of more an interesting question or an individual question is from me. Why no cats, no motorcycles? From your website, I'd have thought there would be a scene or two at least that dealt with.
I've used cats in way too many books of late. One of my big indie series is all about lycanthropes. That was under my pen name, Jan Stry. And I mean, 18 books in the first series, and I'm working on book 6 or 7 of the follow-on series. And there are cats in that, and I've used them in other things too. And I figured it was getting a bit played. I like big cats because I've had them. I especially like leopards. They're my favorite. Most trainers are afraid of them. I love them. We get along. I've raised lions and stuff. The only big cat I've never really raised, I've worked with, the tigers. But I felt I was overdoing it. And as far as motorcycles, there just really wasn't a place for it in the story. Yeah. There just really, really wasn't. And so they didn't really get stuck in, just mostly because of that reason.
Cool. So my penultimate question tonight is, what, aside from its raw entertainment value, do you hope readers will carry with them long after reading Somerset?
That's a tough one, because my first goal as an author is to be an entertainer and to entertain people and make them smile and make them, but I do want to make them think, but I'm not trying to preach. I'm not trying to, preach to people. I think some of the idea is just that, you can always make your way, and where you are now does not guarantee what you will be in the future. And just because you may have a dark past or have a history of having done some bad things, you can rise above that. There are always choices you can make and always improvements you can do. And there's always a better life out there if you're willing to work for it. If you're willing to make the change. At one point in my life, I really was not happy where everything was going in my life. So I moved 3,000 miles. And I only knew one person where I moved, didn't know anybody else. I didn't have a job. And I had kind of promised a job that fell through. So I just packed everything up and left. And I did that. I mean, moving here to Texas, where I am now, I just got fed up with the way things were going in California. And I could see the writing on the wall. I was like, that's it. 60 days later, I bought a house in Texas. From the time I said we're moving, within 60 days, I'd closed. And 2 months, a month later, I was gone. And 2 months later, my spouse was gone. And that was it. You got to just be willing to sit there and say, you know what? I can make friends wherever I go. I can make a good life wherever I can go. You just have to be willing to say, I'm not happy with this state of affairs. And I'm not going to stick with it. And sometimes you have to change the people in your life, especially if they're dragging you down. I've known people who were alcoholics and drug addicts. And for them, the thing that saved them was they literally got away from the people they were with, who kept dragging them down, and they went someplace else. And for Dave, that's part of it. Dave has two things. He wants to better himself, but he wants to live in a place that he enjoys. He wants to live in a better society. His original path he was on as a kid was a pretty destructive path.
Right.
And sooner or later that would have caught up with him.
Well, and the other thing that kind of shines through in this too is that just because you have a bad past doesn't mean that you can't use those skills for that you learn dealing with that negative history to better yourself in the future.
And that's also very true. I mean, I grew up in New York, and I spent a lot of time in New York City. And I've done some things I'm not proud of, but you learn from it, and you start to learn how to deal with certain situations and deal with certain people. And when you run into certain kinds of people and you act a certain way, they realize that if they're going to throw down, they're not going to walk away unhurt. They're going to get hurt, and they may get hurt real bad. And for a lot of the bad characters in the world, these people are not terribly brave.
Right.
They're not morally strong, and you could say that a lot of them are cowards, and they're definitely lazy, and they're not going to go up against something where they have a chance of losing. And that's, one of the things. Dave has all these skills from things he did when he was a kid until he got set on the quote unquote straight and narrow, if you want to call it that. And as things start going on, because of things from his past he has no control over, there are some things that he has to deal with, but he has, the strength to deal with it because he knows what to do. Right. In some ways, I guess he's like a Heinlein hero. He can rise to the challenge.
Very cool.
And
So yeah, the hope is that people will recognize it doesn't matter what you're coming from. If you decide to make a change, you can make a change.
Yeah, you gotta have faith in yourself.
That's a good way to be, I think, is to kind of know that you can make a better change if you're willing to sacrifice for it. So last question, what conventions can your fans hope to catch up with you at? And what other work do you have in the pipeline for your fans to read?
Okay, I go to LibertyCon in Chattanooga. That's the only convention I reliably make. I may start going to FenCon again here in Texas. It's in Dallas. There's a convention in Tulsa. I went last year. I might go this coming year. I haven't quite decided. I used to go to a lot of conventions, but in the last few years, I kind of backed off. So I don't really know for sure how many conventions I'll go to, because unless I'm there to meet people who I know, conventions don't really hold a lot for me, because I can't learn anything there at this point, because I've been to all the writers' workshops and everything you could possibly be. So for a lot of that, that draw is kind of gone. And plus, I know so many authors these days that if I want to talk to them, I can just pick up the phone or send them an email.
Right.
It's not like I have to go to a convention to meet these people. I suppose if I get more popular again, with people who go to conventions, because I have a lot of fans from my indie work,
right?
But most of those people don't go to conventions, which is kind of wild. Some go to LibertyCon because they're connected, but to do as well as I have, and you go to convention, it's like nobody's read your stuff. It's kind of a downer.
I call it a lesson in humility. The signings especially are.
I try really hard not to be an asshole. I don't even do signings unless the only one I've done so far is because Tony asked me to, and I really, I just don't want to do them because I don't know. I don't feel that I'm that big. It's only when I look at my royalties sometimes I'm going, holy shit. That's
not a bad place to be at.
When I start getting emails from Navy SEALs and artillerymen about stuff, about, hey, what's the story with this and the story? I'm like, oh, man.
Well, that's another good place to go is for LibertyCon is also very good for that. You can connect with all sorts of folks, tankers, engineers, NASA scientists, cops, and all sorts of folks, nuclear engineers as well. So there's, it sounds like this at LibertyCon. If you're going to go to one convention, it's probably not a bad one to go to.
As for what's in the pipeline, what I'm working on immediately, I just finished under my pen name, Valen's Heritage series. I promised my fans I'd write a bunch of those, and they're paying the bills. They're doing really well. I just finished one. I'm waiting for cover art. I'm going to start another one tomorrow. I'm supposed to start it today. Once that's done, the sequel to Summer's End will be written. I did manage to sell Tony on 2 series that I want to do for Baen, about 4 to 6 book series. I gave her the plots. I haven't completely plotted. Well, Wolfhounds is completely plotted out, and that's a science fiction story, but it's a science fiction space opera kind of story. So, and mill sci-fi. So space opera, mill sci-fi. The other one I don't even have a title for yet, but it's a combination of like cyberpunk and what you call it, runner. The Seattle one. Damn, I can't remember the name of it. But that kind of genre. I'm melding 2 genres. Shadowrun. That's it. Shadowrun.
Shadowrun, yeah.
And I have a world and a story because it's a trilogy I wrote that's actually available on Baen's website, the Days of Future Past trilogy. And no, I did not steal that from the cartoon. I stole it from the same place they did. And they did steal it.
Well, titles can't be stolen, so we're good.
I didn't even know. If I had known that it was out there when the Marvel thing or whatever was out there, I would have changed the title because I didn't know though.
Right.
But it's that world about 150, 200 years in the future. So there's a lot of dystopia that's coming back because I think we are ready for a new genre or a resurgence of an old genre. Right. I have done that twice now in my career, in my indie career, and been very successful with it each time because I really don't want to go where everybody else has been. I want to do something a little different and take a new look at stuff and try to give some people something different to enjoy.
Well, I certainly enjoyed Summer's End, and I appreciate you taking some time out from your, sounds like, very busy schedule to talk with us today. This has been the Baen Free Radio Hour with John Van Stry, talking about Summer's End.
And now we bring you Timothy Zahn's Cobra. Earth's only hope was the Cobras. The colony worlds Adirondack and Silvern fell to the Troft forces almost without a struggle. Outnumbered and on the defensive, Earth made a desperate decision. It would attack the aliens not from space, but on the ground, with forces the Trofts did not even suspect. Thus were created the Cobras, a guerrilla force whose weapons were surgically implanted, invisible to the unsuspecting eye, yet undeniably deadly. But power brings temptation, and not all the Cobras could be trusted to fight for Earth alone. Johnny Moreau would learn the uses and abuses of his special abilities and what it truly meant to be a Cobra.
Jamie paused outside the door, took a single deep breath, and knocked lightly. There was no answer. He raised his hand to knock again, then thought better of it. After all, it was his bedroom, too. Opening the door, he went in. Seated at Jamie's writing desk, hands curled into fists in front of him, Johnny was staring out the window. Jamie cleared his throat. "Hello, Jamie," Johnny said without turning. "Hi." The desk, Jamie saw, was covered with official-looking mag forms. "I just dropped by to tell you that dinner will be ready in about 15 minutes. He nodded at the desk. "What are you up to?" "Filling out some college applications." "Oh, decided to go back to school?" Johnny shrugged. "I might as well." Stepping to his brother's side, Jamie scanned the mag forms. University of Rajput, Bamu Technical Institute on Zimbabwe, University of Erie, all off-planet. "You're going to have a long way to travel when you come home for Christmas," he commented. Another fact caught his eye. All 3 applications were filled out only up to the space marked military service. "I don't expect to come home very often," Johnny said quietly. "You're just going to give up, huh?" Jamie put as much scorn into the words as he could. It had no effect. "I'm retreating from enemy territory," Johnny corrected mildly. "The kids are dead, Johnny. There's nothing in the universe you can do about it. Look, the town doesn't blame you. No charges were brought, remember? So quit blaming yourself. Accept the fact of what happened and let go of it." "You're confusing legal and moral guilt. Legally, I'm clear. Morally, no. And the town's not going to let me forget it. I can see the disgust and fear in people's eyes. They're even afraid to be sarcastic to me anymore." "Well, it's better than not getting any respect at all." Johnny snorted. "Thanks a lot," he said wryly. "I'd rather be picked on." A sign of life at last. Jamie pressed ahead, afraid of losing the spark. "You know, Dadder and I have been talking about the shop. You remember that we didn't have enough equipment for 3 workers? "Yes, and you still don't." "Right, but what stops us from having you and Dadder run the place while I go out and work somewhere else for a few months?" Johnny was silent for a moment, but then shook his head. "Thanks, but no. It wouldn't be fair." "Why not? That job used to be yours. It's not like you were butting in. Actually, I'd kind of like to try something else for a while." "I'd probably drive away all the customers if I was there." Jamie's lip twisted. "That won't fly, and you know it. Dadder's customers are there because they like him and his work. They don't give 2 hoots who handles the actual repairs as long as Dadder supervises everything. You're just making excuses." Johnny closed his eyes briefly. "And what if I am?" "I suppose it doesn't matter to you right now whether or not you let your life go down the drain," Jamie gritted. "But you might take a moment to consider what you're doing to Gwen." "Yeah. The other kids are pretty hard on her, aren't they?" "I'm not referring to them. Sure, she's lost most of her friends, but there are a couple who are sticking by her. What's killing her is having to watch her big brother tearing himself to shreds." Johnny looked up for the first time. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. She's been putting up a good front for your sake, but the rest of us know how much it hurts her to see the brother she adores sitting in his room and—" He groped for the right words. "Wallowing in self-pity?" "Yeah. You owe her better than that, Johnny. She's already lost most of her friends. She deserves to keep her brother." Johnny looked back out the window for a long moment, then glanced down at the college applications. "You're right." He took a deep breath, let it out slowly. "Okay. You can tell Dadder he's got himself a new worker," he said, collecting the mag forms together into a neat pile. "I'll start whenever he's ready for me." Jamie grinned and gripped his brother's shoulder. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Can I tell Mommer and Gwen, too?" "Sure. No, just Mommer." He stood up and gave Jamie a passable attempt at a smile. "I'll go tell Gwen myself." The tiny spot of bluish light, brilliant even through the decontrast goggles, crawled to the edge of the metal and vanished. Pushing up the goggles, Johnny set the laser down and inspected the seam. Spotting a minor flaw, he corrected it, and then began removing the fender from its clamps. He had not quite finished the job when a gentle buzz signaled that a car had pulled into the drive. Grimacing, Johnny took off his goggles and headed for the front of the shop. Mayor Stillman was out of his car and walking toward the door when Johnny emerged from the building. "Hello, Johnny," he smiled, holding out his hand with no trace of hesitation. "How are you doing?" "Fine, Mr. Stillman," Johnny said, feeling awkward as he shook hands. He'd been working here for 3 weeks now, but still didn't feel comfortable dealing directly with his father's customers. "Dadder's out right now. Can I help you with something?" Stillman shook his head. "I really just dropped by to say hello to you and to bring you some news. I heard this morning that Wyatt Brothers Contracting is putting together a group to demolish the old Lamplighter Hotel. Would you be interested in applying for a job with them?" "No, I don't think so. I'm doing okay here right now. But thanks for—" He was cut off by a dull thunderclap. "What was that?" Stillman asked, glancing at the cloudless sky. "Explosion," Johnny said curtly, eyes searching the southwest sky for evidence of fire. For an instant he was back on Adirondack. "A big one, southwest of us. There." He pointed to a thin plume of smoke that had suddenly appeared. "The cesium extractor, I'll bet," Stillman muttered. "Damn. Come on, let's go." The déjà vu vanished. "I can't go with you," Johnny said. "Never mind the shop. No one will steal anything." Stillman was already getting into his car. "But there would be crowds there. I just can't." "This is no time for shyness," the mayor snapped. "If that blast really was all the way over at the extraction plant, there's probably one hell of a fire there now. They might need our help. Come on." Johnny obeyed. The smoke plume, he noted, was growing darker by the second. Stillman was right on all counts. The 4-story cesium extraction plant was indeed burning furiously as they roared up to the edge of the growing crowd of spectators. The patrollers and fighters were already there, the latter pouring a white liquid through the doors and windows of the building. The flames Johnny saw as he and the mayor pushed through the crowd seemed largely confined to the first floor. The entire floor was burning, however, with flames extending even a meter or two onto the ground outside the building. Clearly the fire was being fueled by one or more liquids. The 2 men had reached one of the patrollers now. "Keep back, folks," he began. "I'm Mayor Stillman." Stillman identified himself. "What can we do to help?" "Just keep back." "No, wait a second. You can help us string a cordon line. There could be another explosion any time, and we've got to keep these people back. The stuff's over there." The stuff consisted of thin, bottom-weighted poles and a bright red cord to string between them. Stillman and Johnny joined 3 patrollers who were in the process of setting up the line. "How'd it happen?" Stillman asked as they worked, shouting to make himself heard over the roar of the flames. "Witnesses say a tank of iaphanine got ruptured somehow and ignited," one of the patrollers shouted back. "Before they could put it out, the heat set off another couple of tanks. I guess they had a few hundred kiloliters of the damn stuff in there. It's used in the refining process, and the whole lot went up at once. It's a wonder the building's still standing." "Anyone still in there?" "Yeah, 6 or so, 3rd floor." Johnny turned, squinting against the light. Sure enough, he could see 2 or 3 anxious faces at a partially open 3rd-floor window. Directly below them, Cedar Lake's single Skyhooker fire truck had been driven to within a cautious 10 meters of the building and was extending its ladder upwards. Johnny turned back to the cordon line. The blast was deafening, and Johnny's nanocomputer reacted by throwing him flat on the ground. Twisting around to face the building, he saw that a large chunk of wall a dozen meters from the working fires had been disintegrated by the explosion. In its place was now a solid sheet of blue-tinged yellow flame. Fortunately, none of the fires seemed to have been hurt. "Oh, hell," a patroller said as Johnny scrambled to his feet. "Look at that." A piece of the wall had apparently winged the skyhooker's ladder on its way to oblivion. One of the uprights had been mangled, causing the whole structure to sag to the side. Even as the fighters hurriedly brought it down, the upright snapped, toppling the ladder to the ground. "Damn," Stillman muttered. "Do they have another ladder long enough?" "Not when it has to sit that far from the wall," the patroller gritted. "I don't think the public works tall trucks can reach that high either." "Maybe we can get a hoverplane from Horizon City," Stillman said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "They haven't got time." Johnny pointed at the second-floor windows. "The fire's already on the second floor. Something's got to be done right away." The fighters had apparently come to the same conclusion and were pulling one of their other ladders from its rack on the skyhooker. "It looks like they're going to try to reach the second floor and work their way to the third from inside," the patroller muttered. "That's suicide." Stillman shook his head. "Isn't there any place they can set up airbags close enough to let the men jump?" The answer to that was obvious, and no one bothered to voice it. If the fighters could have done that, they would have already done so. Clearly, the flames extended too far from the building for that to work. "Do we have any strong rope?" Johnny asked suddenly. "I'm sure I could throw one end of it to them." "But they'd slide down into the fire," Stillman pointed out. "Not if you anchored the bottom end 15 or 20 meters away, tied it to one of the fire trucks, say. Come on, let's go talk to one of the fighters." They found the fire chief and the group trying to set up the new ladder. "It's a nice idea, but I doubt if all of the men up there could make it down a rope." He frowned after Johnny had sketched his plan. "They've been in smoke and terrific heat for nearly a quarter hour now and are probably getting close to collapse." "Do you have anything like a breeches buoy?" Johnny asked. "It's like a sling with a pulley that slides on a rope." The chief shook his head. "Look, I haven't got any more time to waste here. We've got to get our men inside right away." "You can't send men into that," Stillman objected. "The whole second floor must be on fire by now. That's why we have to hurry, damn it." Johnny fought a brief battle with himself. But as Stillman had said, this was no time to be shy. "There's another way. I can take a rope to them along the outside of the building." "What? How?" "You'll see. I'll need at least 30 meters of rope, a pair of insulated gloves, and about 10 strips of heavy cloth. Now!" The tone of command, once learned, was not easily forgotten. Nor was it easy to resist. And within a minute Johnny was standing beneath his third-floor target window, as close to the building as the flames permitted. The rope, tied firmly around his waist, trailed behind him, kept just taut enough to ensure that it, too, stayed out of the fire. Taking a deep breath, Johnny bent his knees and jumped. 3 years of practice had indeed made perfect. He caught the window ledge at the top of his arc, curled up feet taking the impact against red-hot brick. In a single smooth motion, he pulled himself through the half-open window and into the building. The fire chief's guess about the heat and smoke had been correct. The 7 men lying or sitting on the floor of the small room were so groggy they weren't even startled by Johnny's sudden appearance. 3 were already unconscious, alive but just barely. The first task was to get the window completely open. It was designed, Johnny saw, to only open halfway, the metal frame of the upper section firmly joined to the wall. A few carefully placed laser shots into the heat-softened metal did the trick, and a single kick popped the pane neatly and sent it tumbling to the ground. Moving swiftly now, Johnny untied the rope from his waist and fastened it to a nearby stanchion, tugging 3 times on it to alert the fighters below to take up the slack. Hoisting one of the unconscious men to a more or less vertical position, he tied a strip of cloth to the man's left wrist, tossed the other end over the slanting rope, and tied it to the man's right wrist. With a quick glance outside to make sure the fighters were ready, he lifted the man through the window and let him slide down the taut rope into the waiting arms below. Johnny didn't wait to watch them cut him loose, but went immediately to the second unconscious man. Parts of the floor were beginning to smolder by the time the last man disappeared out the window. Tossing one more cloth strip over the rope, Johnny gripped both ends with his right hand and jumped. The wind of his passage felt like an Arctic blast on his sweaty skin, and he found himself shivering as he reached the ground. Letting go of the cloth, he stumbled a few steps away and heard a strange sound. The crowd was cheering. He turned to look at them, wondering, and it finally dawned on him that they were cheering for him. Unbidden, an embarrassed smile crept onto his face, and he raised his hand shyly in acknowledgement. And then Mayor Stillman was at his side, gripping Johnny's arm and smiling broadly. "You did it, Johnny! You did it!" he shouted over all the noise. Johnny grinned back. With half of Cedar Lake watching, he'd saved 7 men and had risked his life doing it. They'd seen that he wasn't a monster, that his abilities could be used constructively, and most importantly, that he wanted to be helpful. Down deep, he could sense that this was a potential turning point. Maybe, just maybe, things would be different for him now.
That was another installment in Timothy Zahn's Cobra, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude, and welcome aboard to John Van Stry, and good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Sharirod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.